Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. It is 32 years to this day that Kashmiri Hindus were driven out of the valley. And it is estimated that about 500,000 or 5 lakh Kashmiri Hindus were driven out and they scattered all over the world, mostly in Jammu and also in Delhi. And, it's just whoever could move wherever they have done that. And it is still not clear how they are going to find justice. And we have a lot of questions. Some of these things have been on the path of probably recovery. Like, for example, they bifurcated the state into two. There are two union territories, and there is delimitation going on with the Jammu and Kashmir part. And we know that elections will happen once everything is in place. But a lot of stuff is happening. We're also hearing that business is coming back, investment is coming back. So, is this the light at the end of the tunnel for Kashmir? Let's find out from someone who is from Kashmir, who frequently visits Kashmir, and who has the knowledge of Kashmir like the back of her hand. Aarti Tikoo Singh ji, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel.
Namaskar, Sri Ayarji. It's once again, a privilege to be on your platform, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
The pleasure is all mine, Aarti ji. For months on end, we didn't have you on our hangout, and yet within a week, we have you twice. It's all good. So, Aarti ji, you are more or less domiciled in Srinagar. You're going back and forth. You travel a lot, and you're also going to. So, tell us the situation today. Take us back to 1990, and you probably were very young. And so, you tell us how it feels. Is it now light at the end of the tunnel? What are your perceptions? How things are working? Is it good for the Kashmiri Pandits that they feel confident enough to come back and claim their property? What happened? So, in your own words, take it away.
It's a very pertinent question, especially after August 5th, 2019 decision taken by the Modi government to reorganize Jammu and Kashmir and nullify Article 370 and 35A, which were not only legal barriers for integration of Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of India, but also psychological barriers. And
Aarti ji,
really,
your voice is
yeah.
Aarti ji, your voice is cracking up.
Yeah.
Your voice is cracking up. Can we do one thing? Can we?
Okay.
You have two earphones. Maybe you can log out and
hear?
log back in. Yeah, I can hear you fine
Can you
without
hear me
that.
now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that in 2019, August 5th, the decision by the government to reorganize Jammu and Kashmir into two territories and nullification of 370 and 35 barriers, not just the barriers to the greater integration of Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of India, but also psychological barriers. And really, till 2019, I would say my parents' generation and my generation, and perhaps Kashmiri Hindus who are younger to me, had very little hope of one restoration of our rights, had very little hope that Jammu and Kashmir can be turned around, had very little hopes that there will be a day when we could consider return and rehabilitation of our community, which was driven out in 1990 by Islamists who were backed by Pakistan. Now, why did this change happen in 2019? And when I'm pointing out this change, I mean to say that the change in thinking within the community. It happened because, when I say that 35A and 370 acted as psychological barriers between J&K and the rest of India, it's because 35A and 370, which are complementary, which were in fact complementary legislations within Indian constitution, they prevented the rest of India to feel equal citizens in Jammu and Kashmir, even as the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir felt equal citizens in the rest of India. By that I mean that a resident of Jammu and Kashmir before 2019 could go anywhere in the rest of the country. They could go and settle down anywhere and exercise all their fundamental rights granted by the Indian Constitution and enjoy all the perks and privileges of Indian citizenship and Indian laws. But person from, let's say, Tamil Nadu or say Bengal could not enjoy the same rights in Jammu and Kashmir. That changed, that in fact broke down that psychological barrier which had been created for almost 70 years by the Kashmiri Muslim leadership in Kashmir, that J&K was a special state somehow, and J&K deserved to be a special state because it's a Muslim majority state. Now, in 1990, this whole issue of Jammu and Kashmir should deserving a special status, it actually it fell apart because in 1990 it became very evident that Jammu and Kashmir, a Muslim majority state, could not one protect the rights of minorities physically, because when Islamist terrorists were storming the streets, there was no help from the majority community, perhaps because they themselves were afraid or they themselves felt terrified and threatened. And second, the leadership itself, the legislation itself, did not provide any kind of refuge, any kind of help. Third point is that now, after all these years, 30 years or more, 32 years actually, how do we feel now that the relationship has changed? That relationship that existed before 2019 between J&K and the rest of the country, it has changed, and the new amendments that have been brought in by the central government in the last 2 years, they have also paved a way for greater integration, paved way for equal rights to all citizens in J&K. People, for example, two major things happened in the last 2 years. One was the Land Amendment Act, by which anybody in the country can go and set up a business in J&K now. They can acquire property, they can run a business, and nobody is going to prohibit them. Nobody is going to prevent them from if they have any business aspirations. Likewise, the other amendment that came into place was the domicile, which is related to the domicile status. Now, anyone who has served in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years can be a domicile, which means that they will be seen as natives of Jammu and Kashmir. And I think it's a fair thing, because if a Kashmiri Hindu or a Kashmiri Muslim has settled in Delhi or in Chennai or in Kochi for last 15 years, they are seen as natives of that place. Nobody throws them out, or nobody denies them their fundamental rights. Nobody denies them their rights in that region. Similarly, people who have worked in J&K for 15 years should have that right. So these two things are a game changer. They have definitely changed the entire dynamic and scenario in J&K, and that gives a lot of confidence to Kashmiri Hindus of my generation that we maybe not immediately, even though Jammu and Kashmir state where we come from and where we were driven out from, hasn't really shown any blueprint of how we can return and how we will get rehabilitated. the government of the day has not given us any kind of idea or any kind of blueprint with which we could, follow perhaps small steps in that direction. But with the initiatives and the measures that the central government has taken, I think there is hope, because one, there will be a lot of incentive for businesses of say big metropolitan cities and big towns in India to go and invest in Jammu and Kashmir and create jobs and opportunities for youth of my generation, which are younger to my generation, and we might consider taking up jobs there. We might consider doing businesses there. For example, my own brother, Sahil Tikoo. He worked in Delhi for over a decade or so. He is into business now in Jammu and Kashmir. And it happened because there was, he saw an opportunity. He was selling, he was into industrial compressors. Now he went to JNK and he decided that he is going to sell those industrial compressors in both Srinagar and Jammu. So he has made that conscious decision because there is a certain hope and confidence that things will turn around. My other brother Hitesh, also he under Prime Minister's employment package, he availed that opportunity. He took some tests, he qualified the tests, and he got a job in Kashmir. So many people in the community today, I think, are considering that option. But to say that whether the entire community is hopeful that we will return and we will get rehabilitated, I don't think that time has come yet. One, because the security scenario remains dicey. If you remember, some community members were targeted last year um, in 2020. Mr. Bindru, who was a pharmacist, who was killed in Srinagar. Some non Kashmiri minority members were also targeted and they were killed in Kashmir. So that threat and insecurity remains because Pakistan's approach to Kashmir has been persistent. There is no change whatsoever. Cross border terrorism remains their foreign policy towards India. Uh, then, of course, some elements who had been, you can say that encouraged by Pakistan and who have continued even after the 2019 decision. And they work in the terror network in Kashmir. They continue to be there, and it's not going to be very easy for the Kashmiri Pandit community to immediately go. So I think the government of India will have to take several steps before the community really gets prepared to return. Apart from these two aspects, one is of economics, which is jobs and employment and education and security. The third aspect remains that the Kashmiri Pandit or Hindu community would like to see the government taking or passing a legislation which, one, identifies the culprits who were responsible for their ethnic cleansing and genocide in 1990. They would also like that there should be some legislation which can prevent another ethnic cleansing and genocide in Kashmir. So without the legislative, economic, social, and political measures which can really ensure their safety, security, economically, politically, socially, I don't think the community will be prepared to go en masse to Kashmir.
I understand where you're coming from, Aarti ji. Now, let me ask you a different question. Pakistan today is economically on its knees, and it is now becoming more apparent that China is also infusing arms as well as troops into what is essentially Pak occupied Kashmir, which is actually belongs to India. The longer India waits, the worse it's going to get, because China is slowly but steadily putting more and more people in. People say that the city of Gilgit is more or less run by China. They've gotten into the local politics. They know whom to push, whom not to push. They have an enclave that has houses about 1 lakh Chinese, and the signs inside that enclave are all in Chinese. And nobody from the local population can go in. No jobs for the local population in all these projects like the CPEC and anything else that China does. So a lot of resentment is also there in the local population. Do you think that POK matter should be addressed by India now, or it's not really a valid, or it's not really relevant at this point of time? What are your thoughts?
Well, you see, as a student of international relations, I would say that this should have been the only subject which government of India should have taken up with Pakistan in all the bilateral meetings that have been held between the two neighbors in the last 70 years. But unfortunately, successive governments did not show any will and determination to address or to raise this issue with the government of Pakistan. Instead, Pakistan ensured that they talked about our side of Kashmir. They ensured that they destroyed the demographics of Kashmir. They drove out an entire ethnic indigenous community of Kashmiri Hindus from Kashmir. So, but I would say that this issue should remain on the table, because at the end of the day, see, Pakistan is a client state, and Pakistan army is a mercenary army. Till recently, it was a strategic ally of the United States of America, and now that they realize that China has now arrived, and it is uh, either an equal or probably a bigger superpower than the US in some ways. So they are clearly hedging their bets, and they have already. That is why CPEC has been in place for some time now. That is why the mercenary army of Pakistan, in fact, uh, offered Pakistan, which essentially is Gilgit-Baltistan and eventually Balochistan, once CPEC is complete. They offered the territory which belonged to India to China on a silver platter.
They already have
And
done some parts of this disputed area, like the glacier section, to
yeah,
China, isn't it? They don't own
yeah,
that.
absolutely. So, so this is not something new. Pakistan. That's why I said Pakistan is a client state. It is not really a state. It's not a nation. It's not a state. It's a client state. So it will keep, shifting between one superpower or the other, depending on who is more powerful and depending on what they are getting from the either parties. Clearly they but at the same time Pakistan's economy is in a crisis. They are facing a massive collapse of their economy, and at the same time they also have this constant contestation between the army and the civilian leadership. So but that is the nature of a client state to begin with. Now, the question you raised is whether India should be addressing this issue. Absolutely, and India, I think, should also look at its own geopolitical scenario with respect to the United States and China. India has been only an ally of the United States in, you can say that only really in real terms after September 11. Till then, America was completely, you can say that, either delusional, and they thought that the whole monster of Islamist terror will never come to bite it. But it did eventually on September 11, and since then, their perspectives on Islamist terrorism have changed. Uh, and yet, at the same time, the woke generations in America, thanks to the policies of the US, they are not on the same page as those who have realized that the foreign policy of using Islamist terror or encouraging Islamists across the Muslim world has not really paid them well. In the short term, it may have helped, but in the long run, it is not helping them. Now, with China, see, mm, China is also facing several, you can say crises, because even though they may have arrived and they may have the military strength, the economic strength, but Taiwan remains an issue. Uh, Xinjiang remains an issue. Then, of course, Tibet also remains an issue. So China also has its own set of problems. And there is a lot of negotiating power that India has on many fronts, both with, I would say, the US and China, because India, at the end of the day, is number one, the largest democracy. Second, it is, after China, the largest market. Third, unlike China, it is open. It is not a closed system. It is not a totalitarian nation. It's not a totalitarian system like China. And fourth is that India's overall philosophical outlook, philosophical approach to the world is a very liberal approach to life, an approach which will be appreciated by the West, and which will be appreciated by many people, like, for example, people in Xinjiang, people in Tibet, and people in Taiwan. So, overall, India is in a much better position than many would like us to think or believe. In fact, the only pieces that you read about India in the Western press is negative image of India, that India is a fascistic country, India is in crisis on one front or the other. But really, the progress that we have made since 1990, and why am I referring to 1990, is because in 1990, when Kashmiri Hindus were subjected to genocide in Kashmir, the scenario of India was like this. India had political instability because after Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, and even before that, we had entered into an era of coalition governments. We did not have a strong government. Second, we had a balance of payment crisis in 1990, because of which we were forced to do economic reforms. Thankfully, we did them. And third was, of course, that we were still far away from doing nuclear tests, far away from having stable economic growth, and far away from science and technology and all the accomplishments we have made in the last 30 years. So, in 30 years, we have progressed a lot. We have made advances in almost every sphere, whether it's military, whether it's economy, whether it's education, whether it's science and technology. So I think we are in a much better position than we were in 1990. Today we can talk about Gilgit Baltistan, and today we have a lot of negotiating power vis-a-vis the US and China.
Well, hopeful. I would you say green shoots?
Yes.
Wonderful,
That's
Aarti. Now, moving forward, when do you think? I mean, this is just a guess. I'm not going to hold you to it. The delimitation exercise has started, and again, both sides were grumbling about the number of seats being allocated and so on. If both sides grumble, that means it's a good deal because somebody has actually done an equitable distribution. When do you think? Is it even important that J&K become a full-fledged state? What is the? Why can't it just make progress as a union territory? What are your thoughts?
I don't think the demand of statehood is an urgent demand coming from anywhere, either of the regions. because I do travel and I talk to people. I don't think statehood is as important as elections in Jammu and Kashmir. I think people would generally like to have their local representatives to whom they can go to for their day to day issues. I do think that people would like to have political power. So I think that is very different from having statehood. Now, people in Kashmir are also reconciled with the decision that was taken on August 5th, 2019. Remember, a lot of these mainstream political parties, National Conference, PDP, before the decision was taken, were crying hoarse and even claiming that there will be bloodbath and nobody will stand up for India in Kashmir and nobody is going to raise Indian flag in Kashmir. None of that happened, and it's very clear that people in Kashmir are far more pragmatic and you can say far more intelligent than their leaders give them credit for, because we haven't seen the kind of violence that all these politicians were threatening and were claiming to have. And second, the amendments that have come into place in the last 2 years, I don't see people really upset about those amendments. I think I think there is a they may not be thrilled, but there is no resistance and there is no you can say opposition to that. Third, I would say that personally, you asked me, delimitation exercise, they could have waited for a year or so, because one, in 1990, when an entire community was driven out of Kashmir, most of them, the majority, went to Jammu region. So, which means that the demographic changed in Kashmir region as well as Jammu, because those 300,000 Kashmiri Hindus, or more than that, 300,000 is generally the US figure. Uh, but let us say these 300,000, out of these 300,000, the majority, almost 200,000, are concentrated in Jammu. Now, but they don't have a political constituency. They did not have a vote for the longest time. In fact, many of them still don't. Now, that was not factored in. Second, I would say that the census of Jammu and Kashmir in the was critical, because the last census was actually a joke, because lot of Kashmiri Hindus who have dispersed after 1990, they are around the country, they're across the country, and yet they are domiciled. They continue to be. They should be ideally voters. They should be counted as voters because they do not have votes. And third is that not just Kashmiri Hindus, but also various other groups, for example, West Pakistan refugees, who, after the nullification of 370 and 35A, are now seen as domicile. Similarly, Dalits, scheduled castes who were not seen as domicile, have now domicile and therefore should be included. For example, children of Kashmiri Hindu women who married non-state subjects, they were not considered domicile. For example, my nieces and nephews of my siblings who married outside, and most of us did marry non-state subjects, they were not considered domicile and they should be counted as domicile as well as voters. So none of these things have been taken into account, and delimitation exercise was started without waiting for the new census. I think they should have waited for the new census and then done the delimitation exercise. Be that as it may, but the issue here is that now that they are going to give, I think, 6 constituencies to Jammu and 1 to Kashmir. It remains to be seen, how it plays out in electoral politics. But this, main important the issue here really is that uh, once the delimitation happens and constituencies are created and people get into this election mode, will they really be desperate for a state or union territory? At this moment, I do not see any such desperation. I do not see that people want state rights. I don't see that. I think people are happy and content as long as their issues are addressed, and as well as they get some political representation.
There's one thing that I forgot to mention to our viewers. Viewers, there's one good thing that the Modi government did, and that was to make money available at the panchayat level and the district level so that they could self govern. Before, what used to happen was money used to be given to the government in power, and this was a massive corruption that, the thing never reached the people it was supposed to reach. This could be something that was done even like in 2017 or 2018. So I think that was done before the 2019 370 abrogation. I think that may also have a role to play in all this. Do you can you throw some light on that?
Absolutely. You see, J&K used to get 90% of funds from the center, and it produced very little revenue. In fact, in terms of revenue, it didn't have much because, as it is, J&K's revenue came mostly from tourism. But then Jammu and Kashmir had taken massive loans and had been, defaulting on those loans year after year, and the funds kept coming in. There was no accountability, there was no transparency. In fact, under the security related expenditure, a category which was created after the Islamist terrorism broke out in 1990, under this category, there were unlimited funds going to Jammu and Kashmir government, no accountability whatsoever. Lot of these security related expenditure used to go directly into the pockets of politicians. In fact, I remember Transparency International, which looks at a corruption index in India, for years altogether, put Jammu and Kashmir as number one or number two most corrupt state in India. So that was happening because that was the nature of politics in Jammu and Kashmir since 1950s. In fact, everybody who's familiar with the history of Jammu and Kashmir used to say that in every political party or every chief minister, whosoever was in power, was essentially being paid by the government of India, whether it was Bakshi or Sheikh Abdullah or anybody else. They were essentially being paid to in a way, the government of India used to appease them so that they did not create a chaos, they did not blackmail, or they did not threaten India that they were going to quit India, they were going to join Pakistan. So that politics, that soft separatist politics, was used and played by almost every politician, every chief minister in Jammu and Kashmir since 1953. If I don't know if you know the history of Jammu and Kashmir, but Sheikh Abdullah was precisely for this reason in 1953 sent to jail, which in today's day is not possible. Even though Farooq Abdullah and Omar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti are openly seditious, openly have been threatening the Indian state, but nobody has put them behind the bars. They were detained for some time because of the situation in Jammu and Kashmir in 2019. But for the kind of seditious statements they've been making and riling up people in the last 30 years or so or more, they should, there should have been a legal case against them. They should have been prosecuted, but that's another story altogether. Now, coming back to the corruption, panchayats now are in a position where they get funds directly, where they decide what they want in their villages. So the program which was initiated under the Modi government, called Back to Villages, was essentially that villages will decide the kind of facilities they need, the kind of development they need. And it's a phenomenal thing. That is why people contested panchayat elections despite the threat of terror groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar, and Hizbul. And DDC elections happened likewise. Mayor elections happened likewise, because people do see that, funds are coming, and they can use those funds for their development in their respective regions.
So in one stroke, they have also made or rendered useless these politicians who probably were thinking larger than life of what they could as a party impact on the state. So, which is a good thing. They basically had their teeth pulled. Um, Aarti, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your thoughts. It's a real eye opener, because we've heard a lot of things, we see a lot of things, we read a lot of things, but nothing compares to listening to someone who has gone through the pain, and now you are seeing the fruits of the efforts that have been put in. It's very easy for everyone to say, but this, but that. It's not easy. You have come this so far away, and now to drag yourself back to that position. In fact, I'm really piqued by your comment that they should have done one more census and then done the redistricting. In fact, many people said that they should have used 1981 as the basis, and used the 1981 in a proportional way, and then done the computation, because in 1981 the Kashmiri Pandits were still in Kashmir. So again, if
Yeah,
Mandal
that
can
would,
go to 19, you see, if Mandal can go back to 1931 and say that that is what is the composition of India in terms of reservations, that's 100 years, almost 100 years.
yeah,
This makes sense.
yeah. No, I see there is a valid argument. Even if they had taken 1981 census, it would obviously mean that, they factored in the disruption caused by 1990 ethnic cleansing, because one, after 1990, there's been a major decline in population of Kashmiri Hindus because of one
Uncertain
side.
future, uncertain future. I can understand
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So why? So if had they taken 1981 census, that would have made sense. But I would say that the latest census could have also taken into account all those factors, but as well as taken into account the fact that many, for example, women, as I pointed out, many Kashmiri Hindu women who married outside, their children, they also need to be included. And so that is why the latest census, I refer to the latest census. But the thing is that the government, for some reason, has gone ahead with this exercise. uh, and we have to see how it plays out electorally. But what I can say is that there is no urgency, there is nobody is dying for statehood, except for, of course, the Abdullahs and the Muftis, and the same dynasties which been ruling Kashmir for last 70 years.
Thank you so much, Aarti. And that brings us to a close on today's program. We'll be back again to talk with Aarti on various topics. She is this Islamophobia bill is still making the rounds, and we'll invite her again in a couple of weeks' time to get her take on how things are playing out. Once again, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Namaskar.
Namaskar.